Be unbelievable. Hey guys, welcome to Mad Scientist BBQ. I'm Jeremy Yoder, and today I'm really excited because we are cooking some asador style beef short ribs. At the end of 2023, I went to Argentina for a couple weeks and I got to experience the food culture in Argentina, and if you guys ever get a chance to go, I highly recommend it. One of the coolest ways that they have to cook meat there is asador style. That means you have an open fire and usually meat on a cross or meat in a cage that you're cooking next to the fire. This developed from a very primitive style of cooking. So if you imagine the Argentine gauchos, they're essentially Argentine cowboys, when they wanted to eat, it had to be extremely simple. So they build a fire on the ground, they put a cross in the ground next to the fire, they put big chunks of meat in there and season it simply and cook it, and then they slice it up and eat it. So one of the ways that they would do it is they'd have these huge chunks of meat, and then they would have a big knife, and they'd pull out their knife and they'd cut off a piece, and that's how they would eat. They didn't have plates, they didn't have, forks and spoons and knives the way we would think of. It's extremely primitive, but extremely delicious. And that was one of the coolest things I learned in Argentina, and I want to share that with you guys today. By the way, if you guys are interested, my buddy Al Fragoni, who specializes in Argentine style cooking, especially open fire stuff, is doing a class in Comfort, Texas. He and I are going to be doing the class together. He is going to spend a day doing hands-on cooking, Argentine style, open fire. The spots are only limited to 20, so you're going to spend half the day with me, half the day with him. There's going to be a dinner the night before and a graduation ceremony the morning after. But if you ever wanted a chance to learn Argentine open fire style cooking, this is the opportunity. I know several people who are already champing at the bit to sign up for this thing, so check out the description and it's going to give you all the info you need. But with that being said, let's get a couple of these racks of beef ribs out of the package and talk about how you trim and season them. Hefty. Now, because of where this style of cooking came from, a lot of times they would have whole rib sections just kind of leaned next to a fire, and there was no trimming involved. And so to this day, even if you have something like this, beef short ribs that you would use traditionally in Texas-style barbecue, you don't trim them at all. And one thing that should be noted, even in Texas-style barbecue, there's a little bit of debate about whether you should trim your beef ribs at all or not. I'm in the camp that you should trim your beef ribs to maximize the bark that you get, but some people prefer to leave everything on. In Argentine-style cooking, I think no matter the cut, all the silver skin, all the fat gets left on, because cooking with open fire is a harsher cooking style than typical low and slow barbecue. So the meat needs all the protection it can get. And then when it comes to seasoning, Texas is really simple: salt and pepper, and then oftentimes a few other things thrown in there. But with Argentine style cooking, it's pretty much just salt on the outside of something like this. You could do salt and pepper if you want. You can use a more complex rub, but I strongly caution you against using something that has sugar in it, because that sugar in all likelihood will burn. Now, in comparison to what I saw in Argentina, these 7-pound racks of beef ribs are actually pretty small cuts. I'm going to include some of the pictures of what we saw while we were there. Some of it is, absolutely breathtaking, both because of how they're cooking the meat and the scenery around. But this is going to be an incredibly simple process, and it's going to be vastly different than how beef ribs get cooked in traditional low and slow style barbecue. So instead of going to 200 degrees, it's going to go until everything is finished cooking. We have a nice crust on the outside and everything inside is juicy. As a matter of fact, they don't really even use thermometers that I saw at all in Argentina. Everything goes by feel, but I'm going to try to give you guys some objective measurements to give you a good sense of what it should be, so that you're not just left guessing if you're going to attempt this at home, which I highly suggest that you do. Today, we're using the Tagwood grill behind me, and it is an amazing piece of equipment. I absolutely love it, but it's also super expensive. I think it was $7,000. Puts a strain on my grill buying budget. For most people, I don't know if you need something this specialized. Now, if you can afford getting one, absolutely do. You're gonna love it. But this came from an extraordinarily simple style of cooking. If you have a piece of ground where you can build a fire, and you can put a cross and tie meat to it next to that fire, you can do this style of cooking. So for trimming, I'm gonna put the knife down and just hit this with some extra coarse salt. My buddy Al makes this salt, makes the seasoning. By the way, if you guys were wondering about that class that Al's putting on, it's gonna be hands-on. You're actually gonna be able to get your hands dirty and learn the process, instead of, there's some barbecue classes where you show up, you pay a few $100, and you're there for a couple hours and you hear people talk and you get to try some of the food. This is, you actually learn with tactile sensation. You you feel the fire, you touch the meat, you understand the whole process. So it's going to be a much more immersive experience than just watching something on video. You can use any kind of salt that you want, but typically you want these big grains of salt because it requires a lot of salt, and a lot of salt will fall off during the cooking process. So if you have Diamond Crystal, just season heavy. If you have Morton's, season pretty heavy. And if you have this, just kind of go for it to your heart's content. One thing you can see really quickly is that the salt begins to draw out water, especially because those granules are so big. And at this point, I am going to put them in this little meat cage. So the way this tag wood works is you have a firebox where you put in charcoal and wood. And so the meat gets flavored with a little bit of smoke. It's not going to be nearly as smoky as an offset smoke or something like that, but that's not what it's intended to do. Then as the wood burns into coals, we distribute the coals so we get even cooking kind of up and down that cut. So the fire is going to heat the top portion of the cut, and then the coals will kind of heat the middle and lower portions. And the goal is to distribute the coals such that we get it cooking evenly throughout. So let me get that meat cage, we'll load it up, and we'll get the fire started. I wonder if you could even go 3 wide on this. Anytime I hear 3 wide, I think about that NASCAR pastor guy. Lord Jesus, let us go 3 wide into the turn for your honor and your glory. Joe Nelms, I think was his name. First, we're going to add some Blues Hog charcoal. I've been testing out a lot of different charcoals lately. Some wood chunks, and then we're going to light it up. As this all gets lit, we're going to have coals that begin to drop down. We're going to distribute those. And one thing you'll notice about this grill is that it's completely lined with fire brick, so it really retains heat, which means that you're going to be able to cook a little bit better. So I'm going to check back in maybe 10 or 15 minutes and start distributing these coals, and then we're going to start getting the sights and sounds and smells of asador style cooking. And boy, is it amazing. All right, it's been about 12 minutes and we already have coals falling through this thing and the wood is burning into coals. So I'm gonna start distributing some of the coals. One thing to note is the top of these ribs are gonna be mostly heated by the flame, and everything from the middle down is gonna be heated by the coals. So I'm gonna try to distribute it so that I can put this at an angle and get even heat from here all the way to the top. If you guys sign up for the class, you're gonna see Al demonstrate this. But what he does is he takes his hand and is like, oh, you can hold it there for 2 seconds. That's one level of heat. If you can hold it there for 5 or 6 seconds, that's another level of heat. If you can hold it there for 10 seconds, it's another level of heat. For me, this is gonna be maybe 5, 6 seconds, because generally speaking, you wanna start off slower and then you can increase the temperature. But if you start off and you start burning things, that's no good. The good thing about this setup is that if it's a little too hot, you can raise this up and remove it from the heat and you're not gonna burn things. So, 2 things, I'm gonna distribute coals and I'm gonna set this at an angle so that we start cooking. Have it bone side to the fire just to protect it a little bit more while we get our bearings with this.
Are they gonna be tender or are they gonna be tough?
They're gonna be like the consistency of a sirloin steak.
Huh.
Yeah, but like the juiciest sirloin steak of all time. And way more flavor. Here we go. You can actually smell the meat just beginning to cook. And as this fat starts cooking out and dripping into the coals, it's gonna have that sweet smoke smell. It's gonna be money. It's been about an hour, and as you guys can see, we're starting to render fat from between the membrane and the meat, which is exactly what we want to do. We also want to start drying out that membrane a little bit. And the reason we're starting bone side toward the fire is because the bone is going to conduct heat. And that conduction is super important. I have, actually, right in front of the meat, a digital probe. It's reading right now 181.5 degrees. And you might be thinking, well, that's pretty low. Well, yes, because if I put my hands here, that's about all I can stand. So like, I don't know, 5 seconds would be a stretch. I might actually move this back a little bit. But a couple things to note is that this is cooking with radiant heat. And with radiant heat, you're not going to be able to measure it the same way you would measure air temperature that you might be used to in a regular smoker or a grill or something like that. So what we have to do is we have to actually rely on kind of simpler methods of, ooh, that's really hot. Another thing to know is the rack of beef ribs on the bottom is cooking faster than the ones on the top. Keep this in mind. At the top, to increase temperature, bigger fire. At the bottom, to increase temperature, more coals. So if the bottom is lagging behind, drag some more coals underneath. If the top is lagging behind, build a bigger fire. As you can see, I'm burning quite a bit of wood in here because the top was lagging a little bit, but now we're maybe just a little too warm. We could probably get away with it, but I don't want to risk burning anything, so I'm going to take some gloves and set this back just a little bit. But you can see pull back on the bones. You see that the meat is actually taking on a little bit of that smoke, but the thing that I'm waiting for before I turn the meat, this is something I learned from Al, among many, many other things, is he takes the back of his 2 fingers, puts it on the meat side. When that feels warm, he knows that the heat has transferred through the meat sufficiently that it's time to turn it around and start cooking the opposite side. Actually, on second thought, I'm going to leave it just like this until I need to move it back because I don't want to keep moving it back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So if necessary, I'll move it back. And that's one of the beauties of this simplistic cooking process. So if you're doing it really traditional style where you build a fire on the ground and put meat on a cross next to it, then you could just move the thing further away from the fire or take a shovel and move the fire a little bit further away. Very simple, but very effective. It doesn't look like anything's burning here. We have nice browning on the membrane side. And at the end of this, it's going to be a very different texture than what you would traditionally associate with low and slow barbecue. It's going to be probably something similar to a very tender sirloin, but the richest, juiciest, most delicious sirloin you've ever eaten in your whole life. This is a way of cooking that is, well, Al likes to say, it's not a way of cooking, it's a way of life. And I'm like, yeah, I believe you, man. It is absolutely incredible. It's a way of cooking where there's drama and spectacle to it. Basically, I am just thrilled with this style of cooking, and I'm going to do everything I can to learn how to do it well. I don't know. On third thought, time to make a salmuera. Now, salmuera is essentially a brine, and there are other flavors in it a lot of times, and then you distribute it on the meat that you're cooking for 2 reasons. Because you add extra flavor, and it makes the cooking process gentler because you're putting water on there, and it kind of keeps everything soft, and you can still cook at higher temperatures without the risk of things burning. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to use this asado all-purpose rub, and it's actually made to be a salmuera. The traditional way to actually apply it is you take rosemary, you dip it in the liquid, and you hit the meat with the rosemary, so you get a little bit of that essence of rosemary flavor on the meat itself. 2 tablespoons for each cup. Got to make sure all the salt dissolves. This water is warm. Get this nice and tight. Now, it's a lot more important to do this to the meat side than the bone side, but I'm just going to test it out and make sure my brush works well. This is just going to add a little bit of flavor here. All right. And you don't have to be too careful. You can actually apply this in a spray bottle. I've seen people do that quite a bit. All right, so back to these 2 fingers, feeling the meat here. It no longer feels cold, but it doesn't really have heat coming through. It just kind of feels room temperature. Once I start feeling heat coming through, then I know it's going to be time to flip this thing around and start cooking the meat side. So we're actually pretty close. I would say we're maybe an hour and a half in, and maybe in the next 15 minutes, we're going to flip this around, start getting great color and building a lot of flavor on the meat side. Next up, when we're doing Argentine style cooking, we have to make chimichurri. And chimichurri, in my opinion, is the greatest sauce of all sauces that you can use to put on meat. Now, the problem with chimichurri for me in the past is I'll go buy a bunch of Italian flat leaf parsley and I'll chop it up and then chop up the garlic and all that stuff. And then all of the excess of those ingredients will sit in the fridge long enough before I make a new batch of chimichurri that I have to throw it away before I can use it all. So that problem is solved. If you have a dry chimichurri mix, I'm a big fan of this stuff. I actually like the spicy version too. It is really good, and it will sit on the shelf for an indefinite period of time. I'm sure it's got an expiration date on it somewhere, but I wouldn't worry about it. So we're gonna mix it up. It's 1 part chimichurri mix to 1 part vinegar. And then after that's had time to rehydrate all those ingredients, you add 2 parts of olive oil. The earlier you do this, the better. So if you did this 3 days ago and it's been sitting in the fridge, that is not a problem at all. It's actually going to improve slightly with time. Equal parts of red wine vinegar. Let's mix this together. I mix it up until everything really gets hydrated. I'm already starting to get the smells. So we're going to let this sit, and then just before it's time to serve, I'm going to add the oil. That's starting to look really good. Feel that heat. Ooh. All right, we're 2 hours in or so, and I can feel heat coming through. It's not room temperature, it's hotter than that, and it is time to flip these things around. And as you can see, some of this got pretty dark down here on the membrane side, but luckily that's the membrane side. We don't have to worry about it, and we're gonna just watch carefully and use plenty of the salmuera to make sure that this cooks gently enough so we get even browning on the meat side without anything burning. But I need my gloves to flip this thing around. Just dripping juice. I'm excited about this, guys. All right, time to add a little more charcoal and a little bit more wood. We have moved on to the Kamado Joe. Now remember, I said I was going to try to give you some objective measurements. So even though it's not really accurate to the cooking temperature, we had that probe there to give you an idea of about what you might read. Using the 2-finger method, that's not really going to give you any objective data about how much heat is going through. So I'm going to give you an internal temp of these beef ribs. 163 and 157. So just like we expected, the bottom rack is a little bit further along. I don't think we're actually going to ever hit that 200 mark that you would expect with low and slow barbecue, but we are going to cook it enough to where it will be tender. It's not going to be super tough or anything like that. This is kind of a weird thing where it's not medium rare to remain tender, and it's not all the way to traditional low and slow barbecue temps to get back to tenderness. It's somewhere in between, but somehow, for a reason I can't explain, it works and it's delicious. We flip this around. We're starting to get really good color on the meat side. I'm going to add probably 2 more pieces of wood. That'll be probably the last of the wood that we add. And then I'm going to hit this with some more salmuera just to keep everything nice and soft, make sure nothing's burning. But the smell is outrageous right now, so I can't wait to tear into these things, man. It's going to be so good. We're probably 5 seconds heat of comfortable heat there. But let's hit it with some salmuera, and then we just wait a little bit longer. It's a lot faster than waiting 12 hours or something like that. But this is going to be so good. Oh yeah. Good stuff. I think we're almost done, so let's take a look and then decide how we're going to proceed. All right, nice pullback. This looks really good. Actually, looks really good. This looks really nice. Nice and brown. I think what we're going to do is for maybe 90 seconds, we're going to put it even 1 notch closer to really get nice browning, especially on this top rack of beef ribs. And we're going to leave it like that just long enough to finish the chimichurri by adding some olive oil. So, put it back. Here we go. Just like that. That is going to sizzle. 1. Get a good quality olive oil. It'll really make a difference. Now to me, that is the consistency that I like. You taste all the herbs. You have some of the oil in there. They've all woken up. You get that punch of vinegar. Yes. This, for me, is the greatest sauce in the entire world. Chimichurri. Make it however you want. This is the most convenient way I find to make it. All right, time to get those beef ribs off. Oh, gorgeous browning. I'm going to do that maybe 60 seconds longer. All right. Oh. That's hot. Let's set this aside. 187 there, 189, this one, 187. So you have a gorgeous crust on these, but nothing is burnt, everything is still soft. So the weird thing about this Argentine style asador cooking is that it breaks all of the rules that I've learned. Steaks, we're going to take them to medium rare, maybe medium if you really have to. Low and slow barbecue, we're taking it to 200 plus. But this is somehow weirdly in the middle and magically delicious. I can't explain it. All I can tell you is you guys need to try it, and then you tell me yourself. It's like, especially with beef ribs, it's something that's unlike any other cut or any other way of cooking that I know of. So I'm going to let these rest for just a little bit, and then we're going to tear into them because I am starving. They smell so good. So juicy. Dude, just look at this. So crazy juicy. Like I said, when I've had it in Argentina, it's like the texture of a sirloin, but the juiciest, richest, most flavorful sirloin you've ever had in your life. Like this. Oh my goodness, it smells good. Hold on, let me cut up in the other one. This one was a little bit lower and got more of the heat from the coals rather than the flame. Oh my goodness, look at this. Dude, that's criminal. This is gonna be so good. I gotta try this end piece by itself. Just by itself, crust on the outside, and seasoned with salt, and then we hit it with the salmuera. The peak of simplicity. It was a fire, it was a chunk of meat, and salt. Oh, it's so good. It's so salty and savory and everything. Oh my goodness. Be unbelievable. It's all that marbling makes each bite so juicy. Unbelievable. I've always said that the pinnacle of barbecue is beef short ribs. It still is. Oh, the crust. That's where the membrane and the fat was, and now that is crunchy, almost like a pork crackling, like crispy skin pork belly that you've seen probably a lot of people do. It's got a very similar texture. Yeah, I got to do this more often. It shouldn't be this good. This should go to 200 degrees, or maybe it should go to medium rare, but this should not be this good. This is outrageously good. It's never going to replace slow smoked beef ribs, you know, Texas style, a lot of black pepper, just thick bark. But this is absolutely 100% something I will do again, not just once, but many, many times in the future. Might even try some different variations on it. I mean, it's just so good, and it has no business being half this good. I would highly encourage you, give it a shot, okay? Even if that means you build a fire in your backyard. It's super simple, it's absolutely delightful, and it's one of the many reasons I am super grateful that I got to go to Argentina and try this sort of thing. And if any of you want to learn how to do this from an absolute expert, an absolute wizard when it comes to Argentine-style barbecue, check the link in the description. You can sign up for the class that I'll be doing with Al. Al is gonna be hands-on with you guys, and I'm excited for all the things that I'm gonna learn from him. If you guys enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button down below and subscribe to the channel. You can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, X, Patreon, everywhere at Mad Scientist BBQ. I'll see you guys next time.